Four Oaks, success isn't just a goal, it's the essence of our vision to expect success. From our community-based services, including in-home support and after-school programs, to our residential treatment programs and foster care services, Four Oaks touches the lives of children and families in all 99 counties. With your commitment, we will continue to support our communities across the state for many, many years to come. Thank you so much for your support.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to Iowa Ideas. This is our 9th year hosting this event, which explores topics that are important to Iowans. We're excited for these 2 days of discussion. I think it's going to be great opportunities to learn together as a state. So we're glad to have people tuning in. Before we get started, we want to just extend a thank you to our sponsors, our presenting sponsor for Iowa Ideas, which is ITC Midwest, and of course our Human and Social Services track sponsor, Four Oaks, which we just saw a video for them. We're very grateful to their support in helping make this a conversation that can be free and open to everyone. To our audience members, just to inform you, we have questions. You can ask your questions. You can submit those through the Q&A box or in the Zoom chat today, and we will try to work them into our conversation or ask towards the end. So please be sending those throughout the conversation, and I will try to pull those. My name is Emily Anderson. I am the public safety reporter here at the Gazette, but today I am the Human and Social Services track moderator. So I'm excited to have people here. In this session, we will be discussing competition and collaboration in the nonprofit sphere. So we've got some wonderful panelists with us today. I'm going to invite each of them to just introduce themselves and just tell us your name and your affiliated organization and how long you have been working in the industry. So let's start with Okpara, if you could.
Yeah, hi. No, such a pleasure to be here. I'm Okpara Rice. I'm the CEO of Tanager over in Cedar Rapids. I have literally been doing this work now for 3 decades, which is kind of crazy when I think about it, but it went by really fast. So lots of change and evolution seen over the years.
Absolutely. Sarah, if you could jump in next.
Yeah, good morning. Sarah Dixon. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Iowa Primary Care Association and have been there for 18 years. And had a role at a public policy firm for 7 years prior to that, but have been really in the community health space for almost 2 decades. So great to be with you.
Fantastic. And Alejandro.
Yeah, Alejandro Pino, Executive Director of YPN, which used to be formerly known as Young Parents Network, again in Cedar Rapids. So we're a grassroots organization that started in 1985. So it's our 40th year this year. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I have, let's see, October 22nd will be 7 years for me at YPN. So it's been wonderful to be part of this fantastic organization and community.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to have these wonderful panelists. We have a little bit of a varied background, which I think is great for this particular discussion, looking at just the competition collaboration. It kind of spans all of the different types of nonprofits, right? So to start off, tell us a little bit about this year. I know a lot of the background for this collaboration, this need for collaboration and the competition that we're seeing has to do with funding issues kind of across the board. So tell us a little bit, if you each can, just what has your organization seen this year in terms of changes with federal funding, state funding? How are your finances doing? And whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. So we have a fiscal year that starts in July. And I think one of the things that we did when we were in budget planning for this fiscal year, so thinking back to kind of January, February, we were starting to kind of experience the high level of uncertainty and really did our budget planning where we didn't anticipate nearly as many federal funds coming into our organization. In particular, a lot of our work flows from the CDC to the state of Iowa, a lot of our quality improvement work. And so made the difficult decision to say we're not going to include that in our budget, and we need to have kind of plan A, plan B, and maybe even plan C from a budgetary perspective. So since that time, I'll note that some of those federal funds have actually started to come through. So that's been interesting to then make some adjustments on the back end in terms of having capacity to do the work. And then from a state funding perspective, our organization is probably kind of unique this year, maybe because we had a big expansion of our work from a state funding perspective in the behavioral health space. So lots of change for our organization, but definitely kind of day to day in terms of communication coming about funding streams, and then trying to do a lot of different scenarios, I guess, to just try to navigate through the space.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The question about how are your finances, it always is sort of a funny one, because budgeting, always you have the highest hopes, and there's always curveballs that throw you, that happen throughout the year. Things sometimes don't go as you plan, changes, policy changes, Medicaid changes, all those things for our organization, that we are impacted by, right? And so, right now, things are okay, but you're always like Sarah said, always having plan B, plan C. But going into budgeting, knowing that by the time you get to December, you're making mid-year projections. You're trying to look and read the tea leaves a little bit. What's going to happen in inpatient occupancy, other programs, behavioral health space, new provider, new funders, all those things. There's things you can't really account for, and it feels like economically things are a little bit of a roller coaster, which I know we'll talk about some philanthropy pieces later. So, I think a lot of organizations are, again, trying to manage as close to budgets as possible, but knowing you have to have some of that flexibility throughout the year to adjust.
Yeah, like Sarah mentioned, she keyed in on a certain word, and you're probably going to hear this a lot, is the word uncertainty. And that's really kind of how we were operating as well. We're also on a fiscal year that started July 1. And we were highly anxious, obviously, the last fiscal year, because we received some funding through ECI, which is Early Childhood Iowa. And again, many changes in that arena as well. So we were okay this fiscal year, but as Opara mentioned, next year we don't know again what's gonna happen. There's so many changes. So when you're having to operate in that space, and this is kind of, I think, the topic of this discussion, small to mid-sized organizations, and really I think all organizations are having to really plan for how best can we remain sustainable should that funding completely go away or be incredibly decreased. So again, we're looking at partnerships, we're looking at funding, fundraising differently, having to be innovative. What revenue generating ideas can we come up with? I think we're all thinking those those things right now, but thankfully right now for us, we're doing okay. But again, the uncertainty piece is really, it's hard to operate in that space, but we're doing I think the best that we can as an organization right now.
Absolutely. With that uncertainty, you all sort of touched on this a little bit, but is there anything else you want to add about just things you've had to adjust in your services that you do this year? And Alejandro, I know you just mentioned that, so far you've been fine, but there might be stuff going forward. Are there changes you've had to make as far as staffing or services you're able to provide because of those funding difficulties?
Yeah, so thankfully for us, not yet, but and I know we've all heard examples of other nonprofits that have been severely impacted. And there was one here in Cedar Rapids actually who found out that I think the majority of their funding was being cut. And it's an organization that we partner very closely with just by the nature of what we do, working with the immigrant and refugee community. But like any organization, even in the corporate world, if you were to lose a huge revenue stream, you would have to make some pretty dramatic, cuts. So whether that's, through the programming that you do, personnel, and essentially just decreasing your expenses. The only difference that I would say in the sphere, then the sector that we work in, that could essentially mean lives. So that's kind of a powerful thing to say, and I don't say that lightly. But when you impact the funding, your programming is not able to be as efficient as it once could have been with the funding that's present. But again, and I think Sarah and Opar did a great job. You're having to plan for the B, C, D budgets and the what ifs, and that's a difficult, again, headspace to be in as an organization, but also personally as a leader of an organization. But so those are the dramatic impacts that would happen if that were to occur.
It puts you in AP. That's a great way of describing it. It puts you in a position where, as you know, you may need to right size because of budget cuts or changes in funding, but you don't know what's around the corner. Could that funding come back? So if you cut too deeply in a very competitive workforce marketplace, you may not be able to come back at the level you were at. And so the health home program is an example. I think people saw, and it was on the press, and I think Gazette reported on it as well. That's a program that the managed care companies are going to be taking in. Again, there was a lot of the provider community saying, really kind of pushing back on that too. But it's going to have real impacts for all those teams, for all those staff, for all those young people and adults who are served by those programs. And so you're always, right sizing. Like that one kind of came out the blue, although I think there were some discussions, depending on who you talk to, they'd have a different perspective. But it felt like, whoa, wait a minute. And then you're trying to adjust. And so there's a lot of that happens throughout the year. And I think it's sort of sometimes a roller coaster, but there are some really talented executives and senior teams around the state who are doing this work and who right size as sort of changes occur. It's just painful to do. It's not the fun part of the work, that's for sure.
Yeah. I'll just add, I think, when you have a little bit of a runway to think about potential changes. So in the case of like the federal reconciliation bill and that kind of Medicaid space, so sometimes you have these changes that are like the next day you learn something and you're like, that funding stream is out, it's gone. And that feels very stressful and hard. Sometimes you do have like a little bit of a longer runway. And so some of the things that we've been thinking about with our member federally qualified health centers is, you can do things like, of course, you can constrict, you can, close service lines that aren't profitable or are really struggling, or maybe another organization can do that work better. You can think about things like shared services. So things that you could do together to maybe reduce costs. I think even in times of uncertainty, there's often opportunity for real growth and expansion as well. And so just trying to never waste a crisis, I guess, is one thing that we say. And then, efficiencies that you can gain potentially through technology. Sometimes you can get like a one-time investment that helps you level up your infrastructure. So trying to not go just to like a RIF kind of mindset, but also think about what are some of the possibilities, even in a, really difficult time.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lot of kind of what this discussion is going to center around, that difference between, taking this dire situation and how we find ourselves working together between the different groups and the collaboration that comes from that. And I'm excited to kind of hear a little bit more. On that note, or here, let's do this, a little bit more background before we kind of jump into the collaboration aspect of it, just more on that funding side. Tell us a little bit, if you can, about the way that the general economic situation right now is affecting your work as well. I know we talked about kind of those federal funding streams, but are you seeing this come in? I guess there's sort of two sides to that, both on the philanthropy, our donations coming in as much with the economic difficulties being faced by the general public right now. And then is that also affecting the demand that you're seeing for your services?
Yeah. Whoever wants to jump in, I want to jump in. Yeah. That's a great question. No, it's a great question. I think, one, I can't say that the demand has ever gone down, right? The need is, especially in behavioral healthcare space in which we work, continues to increase. That's not changing. What you see though, economically, as you look at even just running a business, right? The cost of inflation, the cost of workforce, the cost of insurance, the cost of workman's comp, all those things continue to rise at times when rates feel stagnant, right? In our world. And so we are very lucky in the Cedar Rapids area, and I'm sure in Des Moines as well, a very robust philanthropic environment. People really do step up for the missions that they support. They really do. They come through. The businesses, individuals, But the reality is, in an economic uncertain time, not knowing what's going to happen with stocks, not knowing what's going to happen with folks' retirement accounts, people may not give at the level they have given in the past. Some still do, don't get me wrong, but there are some changes, and people do have to think about those things. But there's no way that we could survive and do the work we do without the support of the philanthropic community. And so I just have to say again, like, it's pretty incredible. And I've lived in multiple states. Folks really step forward to support mission for sure.
Yeah, I can add, my organization, which is a nonprofit, we don't do a ton in terms of like individual giving, but I am involved with our United Way here in central Iowa. And I would say that they have definitely kind of brought visibility to that issue of kind of changes in giving. But we've experienced the same kind of phenomenon with incredibly generous organizations and individuals in our community that are stepping up to fill gaps. One of the things that I think we've seen in our data from the health centers is an increase in the percentage of incredibly low income individuals that are being served by the health centers, slight decreases in, the Medicaid payer mix, and anticipating, more changes there. So I think you do start to get a look at maybe people's economic well-being kind of by seeing those trends, those trends that we don't want to see, which is higher rates of people living, at 100% of the poverty level or below. And when we see those types of trends, we know that those individuals do have higher needs in terms of their ability to access services. So, it requires kind of different augmentation of staff to maybe support families and individuals who really are facing significant barriers in addition to just getting access to the healthcare services that they need.
I think for us, Emily, year end will be kind of a good indicator on the individual side of things too, because typically for a lot of nonprofits, the year end giving individually is a good kind of that's when we raise the most from individuals. We'll kind of see how that trend line goes. We have started to see a little bit of a decrease from our corporate partners with, like sponsorships and giving. They might give a little bit less this year compared to last year. I think part of it, though, what they've been also seeing, and I think community foundations have also been seeing, is there's been such an increase in requests that now they're having to narrow or make it a little bit more competitive in what they used to do to what they do now. So as an example, like application processes now are a little bit more robust in that they're wanting to, only give to certain priorities or issues that they want to give to, like housing or homelessness and that sort of thing. So that's making it a little bit more competitive within that sphere. With regard to the services like Opara, we really have not seen a decrease. If anything, we've seen a little bit of an increase. And a lot of it is because, when we have had some families like lose jobs, so then that impacts the family unit as a whole as well, whereas they're having to maybe look for jobs on second or third shift. Again, the family dynamic gets impacted by that. We're also starting to notice gaps within certain communities, and I know, and YPN serves all people, but we do also work with immigrant and refugee communities. What we're starting to see are gaps within those communities because the organization that I mentioned earlier here in Cedar Rapids that was impacted specifically worked with that population. And when their funding was cut, then, their support was essentially, it's not happening. So we're having to absorb some of that too and be as helpful as we can, but our capacity isn't always there either for being able to do that. So again, we're starting to see some of those gaps. And again, it just impacts not only those communities, but the community in general as well when we see that, because we're all interconnected with that. And unfortunately, and again, this is not a political statement at all. This is just the reality of things, but there's a lot of fear also within certain communities right now. Even everybody here that's legally here, we're starting to see folks, not attend programming as regularly as they would have attended. Again, not a political statement. It's just what's happening. And the vast majority of those folks are here legally, but are still apprehensive about some of the things that that are happening as well. So there's a lot. We're seeing more. We also have a shop that we have on site here, and we operate the Eastern Iowa Diaper Bank as well. And we've seen those numbers of attendees coming to shop at our shop go up, and also diaper bank usage going up as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned kind of that competition aspect as people are trying to get funding from those local funders and groups. What are you seeing? I guess, sometimes when we hear competition, we think, that's a good thing in the free market. We want, businesses, whatever, to compete. How does competition between nonprofits and the way that you guys have to work together to figure out where that funding is going look different than competition that we expect in the business world?
Yeah, that's such a interesting question. I think I'll just start and say, like, we've had similar, I think, experiences with some of the local funders here where, you talk to the, project officers and they're like, we received, 50% more applications in all of our lines of funding, and having to make some really difficult decisions, I think, and change their funding priorities potentially. Competition in the nonprofit sector, I think of it as like maybe healthy competition. You might be looking around and seeing that like a sister nonprofit maybe has stood up like a really cool performance, set of performance metrics or some way to visualize their impact. And you might go and be able to actually learn about their process for doing that. And so I see kind of friendly competition amongst our health centers where they're looking at each other's quality data or, some other measure of success. And then they're talking to each other about like, how'd you get there? What steps did you take? So I think competition, but then also like a willingness to say, here was our experience, and a kind of a willingness to share. I think when you get into more of the corporate sector, I think there's a lot of relationships where people are talking about their work they're doing, but maybe not as much like sharing of business information in the way that you might be able to see that in the nonprofit sector. So that maybe be one perspective of how competition looks differently. And then I'd love to hear from the other panelists too.
Yeah, go ahead, AB.
No, you're good. I think, and Opara mentioned this, that we're very fortunate in Cedar Rapids. We have a really great nonprofit community here that I don't think we really don't do much to compete with one another. But ultimately, if there's limited funding, there's invariably going to be competition for that funding. So again, to Sarah's point earlier, what can we do now strategically different to think about, more collaboration? So I'll give you an example. Another organization reached out to us and said, hey, would you want to go in, and compete for this grant together as two organizations instead of just one organization? So I think it's forcing that mindset to shift just a little bit too, because we're all about, if your heart's in the right place and your organization's doing the work that it's supposed to be doing, impact is kind of the goal, right? We're wanting to help people and uplift and empower people. So the more we can do that together, I think is great. And I know I've had conversations with Opara about this as well. But you also have to think about a little bit of that donor fatigue as well, not only from the individual donor level, but also the corporate and even the foundations too, as they receive more and more. It's just going to get to the point now where I think they're going to start looking at, okay, how are you collaborating with other people? What can we do together to kind of, expand that impact on the collective side? So I think that's an interesting thing, and then on the corporate side, we do still live in the capitalistic system, where competition is typically a good thing because then that ups, people's performance maybe and all that. So I think, and I know we talked a little bit about this, Emily, before, we're in a situation now where we know that there's risks to the federal and state funding pieces. That gap is not going to be able to be covered by the individual, and so that competition I think is going to get a little bit more fierce. And I say this with a lot of love and respect, but we also, I think funders will have to determine if the established nonprofits are doing a good job and their metrics, as Sarah mentioned, are great, and they're providing a great service. and you have newer nonprofits, and I never want to say that new nonprofits should not be starting. Please don't think that that's what I'm saying. But their priorities now are going to have to kind of look at where's the biggest impact going to be made. So instead of and I'm sorry, I'll stop here shortly, but
No,
if there's others, so we operate the Eastern Iowa Diaper Bank. If there's another nonprofit that wants to start another diaper bank down the road, is that a good use of funding, or would it be better to look at an established organization that has the infrastructure already that might be able to scale up a little bit? So it's that sort of mindset, I think, that funders are probably going to be able to have to kind of look at differently. It's a tough deal.
Yeah. I mean, I echo what the other panelists said. I guess we all look at it a little bit differently too, right? I don't necessarily think of it as competition. I think it's more like resource competition more than anything else, right? It's only so many slices of the pie, and everybody understands that. What is unique is, and at this stage of my career, I think these are fascinating things. Like when someone else gets a grant, we celebrate that. Like we are invested in each other's success, even if that means I might not have got that grant, but I know you as an organization are going to knock that out the park, and we'll support you. I think the reality is that we know every nonprofit can't do everything. And we need each other to be successful if we're really trying to move the needle for families and community members, right? Like we need each other to be successful. Where you have it, and part of it is like, how are we communicating our mission? How are we connecting with the philanthropic community? How are we making sure people understand the why behind our ask for donation or to show up for advocacy? Like that's if anything, that's competition. Like how do we continue to communicate better, right? Like those type of things. But we learn from each other. Like there's not a time or a week that goes by I haven't talked to a couple execs about something or sharing some insight, or they're giving me some insight. Or again, as Sarah's talking, like sharing data. How do you do that better? How do we have better, how do we have more impact? But it's done in such a way that it's not like, oh my God, I got to try to hoard this little pocket of stuff over here. It's a different mindset. And so there's always going to be competition for donor dollars and grant dollars. That's just the nature of how that works. But it's really mission driven. And I do think Alejandro does a great job of sort of illustrating, though, some of the contraction that is probably undoubtedly going to happen in our field and in the nonprofit space is going to be driven by the philanthropic community, right? Because as there duplication of services, can this be folded into a larger organization that already has infrastructure? Like those things are going to come, and those conversations are tough. But those are some of the things that I think will happen. But the level of collaboration, even in a competitive environment, is pretty special. Or if we know there's a grant and we're like, man, that agency is really doing that way better than we are, we're not going to even apply. We're not even going to apply for that. And that's very unique, I think, in our space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned kind of those opportunities too, Alejandro. I think you mentioned applying together for one of those grants with a different organization. Have you guys seen other opportunities so far this year as things have been changing to find those collaborative spaces where you can work together? Do you have other examples of kind of collaborative efforts you've been working towards so far, those strategic partnerships?
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say, what I've observed is our health center members in particular kind of exploring things that they could do together. And sometimes, so we're an association, so kind of an umbrella organization. Sometimes we're talking about things that like we could support at the Iowa Primary Care Association, kind of help the health centers maybe get better pricing on something that they all need. They've also really started to identify, I think, things that they could do together just as a small cohort of health centers. So in a particular set of communities, is there a service line that there's a gap, for instance, in maybe access to radiology or infusion services? Is there a subset of health centers that might want to do something together, even if it's not necessarily like a statewide initiative of all the health centers? So we've seen examples of that. I think the point that Akpara made about too, like where you're very consciously trying to make decisions about what you pursue and don't pursue, and who's the lead, and are you a supportive organization? I think those are where we see those types of conversations happening a lot, both at our organization and at the health centers. And then just maybe not as much related to your question, but just a thought that came into my head too about kind of the funders is one of the things I've observed over my career is it takes time to collaborate, and you have to have kind of intentional touch points with the different organizations that are involved to, stay in alignment, figure things out. And so sometimes collaboration takes a little bit longer. And I think our funders, one of the requests that we would say is just, kind of make sure that you are willing to resource kind of collaboration, because I think it leads to great outcomes, and it just takes a little bit of time and resources as organizations try to come together and kind of figure out data sharing, communication, regular touch points. And I think that's worth investing in, I guess is what I'd say.
No, that's a great point about funders actually supporting that too. I guess in transparency here, Alejandra and I actually belong to another nonprofit together called Youthport, which is a collaboration that's been going on for over a decade with Boys and Girls of the Corridor. And again, just to echo Sarah, your sentiment is it takes a long time for relationships to be established, to have that organizational trust. But we meet literally every week with the coordinator to kind of have this continuum together. And it's been a really special thing. Has been very meaningful in our community and for my organization. I know for AP's organization and John Tersey, who's the other executive for Youthport. But again, there's a reason why collaboratives don't happen and sustain a lot, right? Like time, just interest in trying to move your mission forward, the vulnerability that comes with that too. But I think people have more like ad hoc collaborative things, less formal, maybe like you don't have a formal degree like we do, but I think it does happen quite a bit. I think though, I just want to caution that sometimes the conversation from funders can be it can push you in a kind of a weird way. Well, why don't you just go work with that person? They're already doing that work, right? That doesn't happen in a for-profit world, right? Like you have one insurance, just go with that insurance company. No, it doesn't quite work that way, right? There's a lot that goes into organizational philosophy, the way you care for people, the way the boards sort of interact. There's a lot of pieces that have to go along to make collaborations really successful. But when they work, they really can enhance organizations. AP, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree about the Youthport partnership. Essentially, what we did with that is we each bring a certain area of expertise to that group. Whereas YPN would be like the 0 to 5 age range, and then Boys and Girls Club, the continuation after that 5 after school programming, and then obviously teenagers there kind of as that umbrella, mental health support and other programmatic supports too. So looking for like-minded and like-missioned, organizations to work together I think is huge. I'll give another perfect example is Tanager and YPN have also started to work on like a kindergarten ready program as well. And again, it kind of fits with what we do because we don't only work with the kids, but we're also working with the parents to essentially make sure that they feel comfortable with their kids going to kindergarten as well. So really searching for those kind of good synergies with regard to, us fitting with the mission is important because I think, very often we all have a lot of loyalty, including the donors of organizations to specific organizations as well. So you don't want to lose your identity when you do those sorts of things. But again, how can we collaborate and it all goes back, for me at least, to that impact. How can we expand that impact to the people that we serve to make it not only better for them, but essentially a stronger community working together? So that's just my 2 cents.
Absolutely. I think that plays right into another question I had on here prepared, just about how you keep that identity as an organization when you're doing these partnerships and these kind of shared resources. How do you work to ensure that you're still fulfilling your individual purpose as an organization while also sort of sharing between the other groups that you're able to work with and keep that identity, like you said?
I would just say, I would just say, I think there's some kind of interesting things you can do. So,
cutting out a little bit.
Oh, I'm cutting out. Oh dear. Am I back?
I was hearing you fine.
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, okay. So I think there are some really cool conversations you can have when you're looking to collaborate with another organization. And I think it is like surfacing, like is our vision, mission, values, what's in our strategic plan, and giving another organization that you've built some trust with some visibility to that, and then having them do that as well. And that's where you can find some, I think, real alignment. Here's things that we could clearly work on together that advance both of our missions. So I would say just like real clarity and kind of what's in scope and what's out of scope. So defining that on the front end, I think, is super helpful. Our communications teams can really help us, I think, with co-branding. So that's like one thing I've seen really cool. It's like it's presented by, or it's an initiative of, a couple different organizations. And I think not losing your branding and kind of visibility in the community can be a way to also not lose your identity. And then just like, when you've completed maybe the first phase of initiative, like what did we learn? What went well? What didn't? What would we do differently? And then making that very conscious decision about like, does it make sense to keep going? Or was this something we tried and it was super cool and we loved working together, but it didn't result maybe in the thing that we were both looking for? And, what could we do next instead? Stuff like that I think can help really make sure that you get to keep your clear identity. And I'm sure these guys have other ideas too.
Yeah, I think it comes down, Sarah, to your great point too. And I think those conversations are essential, but also having, those honest conversations, as well. If it's not going to be a good, partnership, then we tried it and it didn't work out. The other thing I totally forgot to mention, and Sarah, you'll appreciate this as well, but when we started the diaper bank, that was a collaboration between us and the Eastern Iowa Health Center as well, where we identified a need together when we saw that need within the community, and we worked together to get that going back in 2016. So again, that was just another example that I forgot to mention. The other thing too, and I know Par and I have had a couple of these discussions, is we can also, I think, take some good examples from the corporate space as to how certain structures have been put together, with different companies and potentially replicating that or doing that model within the nonprofit space as well. So those are things that are starting to kind of percolate a little bit in that within the discussion. But again, I think there's ways that we can also collaborate within the corporate space and see how what's worked on their end and potentially also implement it within the nonprofit space.
One of the funniest things that happens sometimes when you're doing collaboratives, and this is always sort of a telling thing, when no one cares whose logo is at the top, all these tells you it's going to work, because the people, again, because the community really understands your brand. They really understand what you stand for. So a lot of it, and I love what you said, Sarah, about just it's just co-branding, that's some marketing communication pieces, but it's really about how leaders go out and talk about those collaborative relationships. That's really where when you get in the room and can explain to people, no, this is why we're connected. This is why we're doing this work together. And when people hear the same message, like they sort of get it. And so it's less, especially because sometimes larger organizations can have a bit of a power imbalance with smaller organizations. So it's really, really critical that people know, no, this is an equal partnership. This is an equal collaborative, and this is why we're doing this. And it happens more often than not. It's really about how you communicate the why. And again, you don't have to give up a part of yourself and your mission, but you're using and leveraging your mission with someone else's mission to move the needle. And I think that really resonates with people.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you mentioned something there, Par, about larger organizations and smaller organizations kind of having to balance that, those collaborations and be able to sort of help provide there. What do we see, especially this year with the funding difficulties that everyone is facing across the board? How are those smaller nonprofits? And I know we have a little bit of a varied room here as far as size, but what are we seeing that smaller nonprofits are maybe needing as far as support from those larger nonprofits that maybe have a little bit more of a system they can fall back on during this time?
Yeah, I would just jump in and start. I think, one, like to run a smaller nonprofit, your margin, you don't have as much on your continuum to cushion. So, the rainy days too, right? And so infrastructure is always one of those costs that you can always, larger nonprofits can assist with, right? Or to have some of the shared services Sarah had mentioned earlier, like sort of shared services sort of stuff. Those are pieces that are really important, and sometimes they just don't even have that ability to have a CFO or an accountant or a controller. Like those are small kind of nuts and bolts things, right? The other piece is also just advice on how to scale, or even helping getting folks in the room with some folks they may not be able to be in the room with or have those relationships with. And sometimes you're acting as a connector. But again, you're always coming at it from a place of an equal, right? I think that's really, really important. It's not, oh, so you're a small nonprofit, let me come help you because I'm the bigger nonprofit. Unless people are coming to you, and so you have to be very careful that it doesn't come off like, you have more and they should be listening to you. People who run small nonprofits are just as passionate about mission and just as driven as anyone who runs a larger nonprofit, right? The goal is that we just have a little bit more scale to do different things. And if I can help you be successful and it fits within mission and what we believe is quality care, then what can I do to help you? And I think that a lot of the larger nonprofits also carry that sort of mindset, in my belief anyway.
Yeah, we have a kind of a cool model in Des Moines, and I think it does exist in other parts of the state and likely outside of the state too, but kind of a synergy center model here in the Des Moines area where our Telegen Community Initiative, kind of a foundation of Telegen, invested in a space where small nonprofits are kind of in the same space, working together. And what I've heard about it is that it not only, reduced a lot of like infrastructure costs for those kind of 1 to 2 kind of people, organizations that are doing really, niche and specialized work in our community. But it also has resulted in just conversations that have led to those same types of collaborative partnerships that we talked about earlier. So there's, just kind of creative things like that can come about that I think can also be something a community gets around and is really proud of in terms of collaboration and shared costs and efficiencies, and models like that could be, I think, things for different communities to think about in this context too.
Yeah, I think for me, and again, for those who don't know, YPN, we would probably be in the small to mid-size category for a nonprofit. And one of the things that I really appreciated from what Opara, mentioned is just his willingness to help. I do agree that, we're fortunate in this community to have those nonprofits that I think are willing to help others as well. One thing that comes to mind, and I know he's been great about this and others have also helped step up a little bit too, is just the advocacy piece with regard to when you look at a lot of the, the funding that we receive, we don't have the ability to maybe make those connections as well, within the state and federal government and doing the advocacy work there as well. So that's very helpful to some nonprofits like YPN who doesn't have the capacity to maybe do some of that work also. But again, it speaks to leadership too within nonprofits that are willing and able to do that work. And they're doing it for the right reason. So certainly appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to throw in a plug real quick before we get to my last few questions, just to remind our audience members that we do have open questions. So if there's any thoughts coming in from those that are watching, things you would like to hear more about or things that were said that piqued your interest, definitely drop those in the chat and we would love to be able to answer those. Another question that I had here just was about the prioritization. How are those conversations looking like as you have funding difficulties or, as you're preparing for future funding difficulties, as you're seeing these changes? How do you talk about what things are the most important and how are you going to kind of sort the different services that you offer?
Yeah, go ahead, Akbar, go ahead.
No, Sarah, you had something. Go ahead.
I was, I think there's a couple of maybe different ways to think about that question. And so one, I'll just say 3 things. So one is I think nonprofits can think about like tools, like how do we actually go about evaluating opportunities? And, we've had some real luck with just setting up some structured tools where we have said, these are the things that are most important to us when we're evaluating an opportunity. And then kind of having that wherewithal and consistency in using those tools. That has been one way for us to really help prioritize either existing services that we provide and kind of where they fall out and whether they're making the impact that we want. Also a way to maybe look at new opportunities and be really discerning about what we pursue. Another thing to think about prioritization, I think, is that, this is where our governance, our boards really can help us and give us feedback about maybe what's most valuable to them. So for us, we are often providing services to our health centers. And so our board is made up of our health center CEOs, and they're a very important voice that makes decisions about our organization, but also can help us prioritize what we do and how we do it. And then the third thing I would say is just we have had a lot of valuable insights that have been provided to us just by partner organizations. So sometimes if you have an opportunity to talk to a couple of your key partners and say, if we did nothing else in the world, and we had to pick one or two things, what's your perspective of what we do that adds the most value? Or are there spaces and places that you see in our community where there's an unmet need that you think, we could step into that space? And so we've had some opportunities that we've pursued because of those external kind of perspectives and things that we didn't necessarily see or think about ourselves. And so I think that's another really good way to get at maybe some prioritization too.
Absolutely.
It's such a great question, right? One of the things that organizations do is strategic planning, right? And everybody, the days of like doing a plan for 5 years and sticking on the shelf and you come back to it in 5 years, and I think those days are long gone. These are really active, living documents that people are using to plan. What's the next step? Where are you growing? Right, even in times where there may be economic downturn, how are you still trying to meet mission? I think that's where you set the priorities. What are we really about? What is it we're trying to do? What is the core of what we are wanting to accomplish in the community? And do we have the resources and partnerships to help us do that? But that's guided by a plan, hopefully a very robust plan, so that you plan for things. And sometimes you don't get to accomplish all those things in that plan. Sometimes, COVID, for example, we had a really aggressive growth track. COVID hit. It was like, oh, okay, all that's on pause, right? As we the world sort of came to a halt, and then we had to figure out what's going to be the next steps, right? And the goal is that you continue to evolve as the community needs evolve. And so, your priorities are gonna shift, and it's going to shift by the circumstances that surround you. But you have to have the ability to be agile to make those changes. And I think, Sarah, you're absolutely right. Having a board that also walks alongside you and understanding they also have to be agile and like, oh man, actually, maybe we won't do this service we've done for 20 years because right now that's not what the community needs and that's not what's really supported. Or saying, nope, we're going to do that service no matter what because we're the only provider that's going to do that, even though it may not be something that's going to even cover itself, but it's mission critical. Those are the decisions that you're making in times like these as well.
Yeah, for us, I think number one is what's our mission? When we look at the priorities, is you want to be true to who you are as an organization and what you're about, because it's very easy to mission creep a little bit and say, oh, we see there's a gap here, maybe we should do something there. But again, is it true to who you are as an organization? Not saying you can't expand, but again, if you have to be strategic about that too, Para's point with strategic planning. The other piece that's also very important to us is listening, getting feedback from the people we serve. And when you look at the priority, that's where, the needs assessments come in that are super important. But oftentimes I think we don't speak to those who we serve as much as we should. So as an example, we have a parent advisory group that we put together who essentially helps to kind of guide that for us. Are we providing what you need? What else do you want to see? And all that as a guiding factor for much of what we do. In addition, also the great board that we have. But again, not to forget the people that we serve, I think is also kind of a guiding factor in that prioritization as well, because it's very fluid and very active, as we all know. Those needs change, but oftentimes you're able to also see kind of overarching kind of focus areas when they give that feedback as well.
Absolutely. We're nearing the end here. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we could fit a couple more questions in. If we have any audience questions that want to come in at the last minute, we'll try to jump on those. But otherwise, let's just do kind of a roundup at this point, and you can take a few minutes each to just talk about, is there anything else that you want the community to know as far as ways that they can support or things that they need to be aware of what's happening in your field right now?
Oh, that's a big one. That's a big question. I think I would just say that one of the things that I've been exploring and having conversations with different providers around the country actually is M&A and what does that look like in the nonprofit space? We don't do a ton of that actually in the nonprofit world because people, as Alejandro said, people are very tied to their missions, right? And so I think that also as folks who sit on different boards and who run organizations, I think we have to be more open to consolidation and doing it in a way where you don't lose the core of who you are and the mission you're trying to make in the community. But we have to be honest that the donor community is like, wait a minute, it's just too much. There's only so many resources, and we have to listen to what they're saying. And I've sat with a few donors who have really challenged me. It's like, what is going on? Why am I getting 50 asks? Like, can't you do this work? And there's honest conversations and their frustrations. And so I think looking at that is how do we continue to strengthen the nonprofit community in a way that also supports everyone's mission, but do we look at that level of consolidation and what does that really mean? I know we're going to have some trainings in the Cedar Rapids community just because it's just not an area we spend much time with learning about, honestly, to see there may be those opportunities there if people are open to it. And so it's not such an easy thing, but I think those are the challenges in these times, especially economically, where we have to be smart and strategic and say, can we do this together more formally than what we do even informally? Because again, we're all trying to save costs and expenses and maximize efficiencies as much as we can. So I think that's one of the challenges is to think about that space differently in our sector.
Absolutely.
I can jump in, AP. It is such a great question. It's a super hard question. I think, one thing for maybe the community members or just people in the audience to kind of think about is, when you're curious about an organization that's doing work in your community, just, ask some curious questions about their work, why they do it a certain way. And that's, I think, a really good way to start a conversation when you maybe see an opportunity for collaboration. So kind of curiosity first, and then that leads to, I think, really good discussions if you kind of come in curious to those types of conversations. We've had an example where an organization was running kind of a community center and turned that over to another organization. And I don't know the ins and outs of kind of how that happened, but just to see a shift like that was super interesting. I imagine it was like, you could do this better. Do you want to take this? It's super important for our community. And, maybe you're this new organization that's taking that on is, better positioned to do that. So just exploring those types of things. And then I think building on what Apara talked about too, is our organization, including myself, we're trying to challenge ourselves. I'm doing it as an individual, as an organization, to say, I've thought about things in a certain way. I think, we thought this is the right way to do those things. And there's not just one right way to do things. And trying to pay attention to some of those bigger macro levers and kind of look both up and down, I think has been something that we're trying to do in terms of we might be able to do something differently or allow another organization to do something that we've been doing. So just trying to kind of open our minds, be curious and flexible, and kind of a willingness to say the way we're doing it today is good, but could it be better? I think those are all ways to kind of get into a space where you can maybe solve some challenges differently.
Love it. Okay, I wrote down 5 quick things. Okay, 5 quick ones. So number 1, I would just encourage folks to just learn about the nonprofit sector and what it provides. I think sometimes we're all in our little bubbles, just human nature, and we don't always know what the true reality is of what's happening. So that's number 1. Number 2, reflect on what would happen if certain nonprofits were not around anymore. What would happen? How do things look differently? Typically, it wouldn't be a very positive thing. 3, advocate to legislators. It's amazing the power of the collective in that respect, when it comes to funding and how that's impactful to essentially all of us. The next one, and I say this very lovingly, but always trust and know that donations are used with care and appreciation. So again, trust the nonprofit. And again, all of us, if not all of us here, go through a yearly audit. We have to do all those fun things every year. So know that we're super appreciative that you work. We really appreciate it. And then the last thing is just understanding how interconnected we all are. And you know, the work of the nonprofit sector is so interconnected and just everything that you see in our communities as well. So those would be the kind of the top 5 for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time here. I think this has been a great discussion. I hope that our audience members were able to take away some helpful aspects of this. I think we're ending just a few minutes early, but that's probably all right. We'll give people a couple minutes back to their day. So thank you all for joining us. This has been a great start to our week-long Iowa Ideas In-Depth Week. Oh, hold on. I am reading the wrong script. This is not a week-long event. This is a great start to our 2-day Iowa Ideas event here. I'm so sorry about that. Join us for the rest of our discussions. We will be having the next Human and Social Services discussion that starts at 10:40, so in just about 5 minutes, is our political impact on human and social services. That'll be about some of what was discussed right at the end here, that kind of advocacy aspect and how we work in the political space in nonprofits. So please jump in, join us there. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, to our presenting sponsor, ITC, and to our track sponsor for the Human and Social Services track, which is 4 Oaks. We really appreciate their support. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks,
guys. Bye.
Thank you.